Around mid-2020, beneath a Pink Floyd Instagram post, a user named KaikeLimar22 left a comment that most people probably would have dismissed as a bot spam post and scrolled past without thinking much of it. It read, "Help me. I'm an artist. I'm in trouble. I discovered a cannibalism restaurant here in Brazil. Now there's an agency of espionage torturing me. My parents were kidnapped. Can you save me? Please, I'm suffering." But underneath this desperate post, he included his full legal name, contact number, complete address, and the location of the said cannibalism restaurant, along with its email and a link to its website. On its own, something like this would be easy to dismiss as a troll or a cheap stunt to grab people's attention. But when other users visited the profile, the situation became a lot harder to brush off. His account was filled with nearly identical posts, all repeating the same accusation and begging strangers to help him before it was too late. And in some of them, he even uploaded legal documents belonging to himself and his parents as a desperate attempt to prove that the people in the story were real. From there, the trail spread beyond Instagram. His Facebook account and X profile were filled with the same desperate pleas going back as far as 2018. And according to people who had been following his situation, he had also been directly messaging strangers with the same request for help for almost 2 years. Eventually, some users also found an art account connected to him, where he often posted dark and disturbing drawings with captions that used phrases like "destroy fascism" and "socialism is fascism," along with frequent references to the same cannibal restaurant. Because of this, one of the first theories many people landed on was that the entire thing was an ARG attempt gone too far. An ARG, or alternate reality game, is basically a fictional story told through real-world platforms, where creators use social media accounts and online profiles as pieces of the narrative. So, from this angle, Kaike's post could be read as a horror project that began with his art and then slowly expanded into something much harder to separate from reality. But that theory had one major problem. If this was a performance, it was an incredibly strange one. There was no clear puzzle to solve and no satisfying reveal waiting at the end. Instead, it was just Kaike repeating the same accusation with a level of commitment that made it feel like something he genuinely believed was happening to him. And that left one uncomfortable possibility open. What if he wasn't trying to create a horror story at all? What if he actually believed every word of it? As strange as the phrase cannibalism restaurant sounds, the idea isn't completely unheard of in Brazil. Because just 8 years earlier in 2012, 3 people were arrested in Garanhuns in the Brazilian state of Pernambuco after the police accused them of murdering at least 2 women, consuming parts of their bodies, and using the rest to make stuffed meat pies that were sold to unsuspecting customers. And what made this case even more disturbing was how ordinary the operation looked from the outside. According to the police, the pies were sold even to schools and hospitals. Now, on its own, this case had no apparent connection to Kaike's story. But it did make Kaike's claim feel slightly less impossible than it first sounded. The problem was that beyond the accusation itself, he never provided anything that actually proved what he was saying. And when people tried to approach him directly for more information, his answers didn't make the story any clearer. For instance, when a Reddit user DM'd him and asked about the supposed espionage, all he got back were fragmented responses like, "They're torturing me, it's an evil organization, it's because they're evil." He sounded terrified, but every attempt to get a clear explanation out of him circled back to the same handful of words. And that's what made the website link he had been attaching to his public posts and comments this whole time so important. Out of everything he flooded the internet with, it was the one piece of information that could actually be checked. But when users followed the link, it led to the website of a hospice and rehabilitation center. When entered into Google Maps, it takes you to a medical facility called Baramid Support House. The building itself looked completely ordinary. Nothing about it pointed toward the kind of horror Kaike was describing. Even the Google reviews described it like any other care facility, with patients and families praising the staff for their attention and support. And these details changed the entire shape of the mystery. Maybe Kaike wasn't exactly lying. Perhaps he had been a patient in this medical center at some point, and because of some kind of severe paranoid psychosis, he had come to believe that the doctors and caregivers around him were not treating people, but harming them. It would explain why his story never produced any solid evidence, while also explaining why he seemed so genuinely terrified every time he repeated it. But as believable as this theory sounds, it has one major problem. Nowhere on Baramed's website did it describe itself as a psychiatric facility or somewhere that treats severe psychological disorders. Their service seems to be directed mainly toward elderly patients. This makes it less likely for Kaike to be a patient at this medical center. But after spending more time with the details of this case, I started to notice something that I haven't seen anyone else point out. Kaike's posts always mentioned two things together: the cannibalism restaurant and the claim that his parents had been kidnapped. And in some of his most desperate uploads, he posts his mother's government-issued identity card as proof that she was a real person. At first, that seems like a strange thing to prove. Nobody was questioning whether his mother existed, but Baramed is a continuing care facility. It's the kind of place where families admit elderly relatives for long-term treatment. And if Kaike's parents had been placed there by other family members and he didn't understand or didn't accept that decision, then everything about his story starts to look different. In his mind, his parents hadn't been admitted for medical care, they had been taken against their will, and the people looking after them weren't doctors, but something far worse. It would explain why he posted the same address hundreds of times and couldn't give a clear answer when people reached out to him. And it would explain posting his mother's identity card for the world to see. He believed someone had taken her, and no one around him was doing anything about it. Either way, both theories still rely on the same foundation: that Kaike was mentally ill and that his paranoia had gotten severe enough to twist a normal care facility into something horrifying inside his own head. Unfortunately, there is no way to confirm any of this, because at some point after the story started gaining attention online, all of Kaike's accounts went dark. It's possible that the people around him or someone who knew him eventually stepped in and got him the help he needed. But until Kaike himself resurfaces or someone who knew him comes forward with an answer, this is where the case stays. On April 1st, 2009, a YouTube channel named Bobby Joe Blythe 007 uploaded a strange video titled "Jesus Taught Me." It was old, blurry footage that was clearly transferred from a VHS tape and recorded in an entirely different era.
Was taken on 13 December 1984, about 7 p.m.
At first, it didn't get much attention and sat on the channel with almost no views for weeks. But when it finally caught the attention of viewers on martial arts forums, it quickly became one of the most disturbing pieces of footage to ever surface on the internet. The video opened inside a small karate dojo in Dumfries, Virginia, where a thin, soft-spoken man had apparently walked in off the street and told the people inside that he'd been trained in martial arts by Jesus Christ himself.
This guy, like I say, he's a priest. He's a 10th degree red belt. And who'd you say promoted you to 10th degree red belt? Jesus did. Okay.
Now, a claim like that obviously suggested the man may not have been in a normal state of mind, but he never came across as aggressive. In fact, he was even clear that he didn't want to hurt anyone and that he only intended to demonstrate what he had learned.
I won't brag or anything of that nature, but okay, demonstrate on him. Well, I won't demonstrate on him. I will demonstrate around him.
The other two men in the frame were the owner of the dojo and one of his students. Both were Marines. And once the man finished explaining himself, the owner told the student to face him. Despite the man repeatedly making it clear that he only wanted to demonstrate, the interaction turned violent almost immediately. And even as he tried to back away, the student continued attacking him while the owner watched and let it happen.
Don't do that anymore. No, just don't do that. Good. I'm not a fighter.
The situation continued to escalate until the man was badly hurt and lying almost unresponsive on the floor, while the owner told the others to drag him out. The video then cut to the camera focusing on the floor, where a trail of blood led toward the exit of the dojo. And, according to the description beneath the video, the man was later found by police officers inside a dumpster behind the building, strongly insinuating that he had been killed. But neither the footage nor the description made it entirely clear whether the man had actually survived what had happened to him or not. And that was what horrified everyone who came across the video. So once martial arts forums got a hold of the clip, it spread fast, and people started trying to figure out where it had come from. The first major clue was the username of the channel itself, which led viewers directly to Bobby Joe Blythe, a former US Marine and the same man who appeared to be giving orders in the video. As for the dojo, it had been a storefront in a shopping center in Dumfries, Virginia. By the time the video appeared online, the place had already been shut down for years. These details only made the entire situation more difficult to explain. Because if this footage actually showed a brutal assault, then why would Bobby be the one to upload it to YouTube decades later? Maybe, in his mind, what happened in that room wasn't a crime at all. When viewers went through the rest of his channel, the videos gave a much clearer sense of the kind of authority he believed in.
We don't tolerate nobody in our domain. We, black belts, this is our place. We can do what we want anytime we feel like it, and feel free as anybody could be in this world, in this place. And in your place, this is yours. This is your go-to. No one treads on your territory. We can do anything we want. Just do it, can so we're liberal. If they come through that door, it's open season.
And if this was the kind of violent culture Bobby had built inside his dojo, it would explain how a badly wounded man could be dragged out the back door without anyone in the room treating it like something that needed to be reported. Naturally, viewers began contacting local authorities and sending them the footage, believing they had uncovered evidence of a crime that had somehow gone unnoticed for decades. But just days later, Captain Ronald Mackey of the Dumfries Police Department released a statement that seemed to shut the entire mystery down. According to him, the victim had survived the attack and had been interviewed by police after the incident. On paper, that should have been the end of it. Except, the explanation started falling apart as soon as more details came out. Another official who was a retired police detective named Chuck Feldbush also claimed the man survived, but his account made the investigation sound far less thorough than the department's statement implied. Officer Chuck said he personally knew both Bobby and the victim, describing the man as a homeless guy who lived in the woods near the dojo. In his own words, "You could tell he had been beaten severely, but he wasn't very cooperative and didn't want to pursue charges." But if that was the entire basis for closing the matter, it also meant that the police never really conducted a proper inquiry into what happened inside that dojo. More importantly, it made the official claim that the victim survived almost impossible to verify. Because even if the attack didn't kill him immediately, it's still possible that a severely beaten, mentally unstable homeless man could have easily died days later from untreated injuries without anyone noticing. And since none of the officers involved could even remember his name, there is no way to trace where he went after that. Searching for hospital records and missing person reports from the area doesn't bring up any matches. And with no more leads to follow, people online started looking deeper into Bobby's background instead. According to several sources, Bobby's dojo may have attracted more than ordinary martial arts students. His background as a former Marine reportedly brought in bodyguards, other Marines, and possibly even local police officers. If that's true, it could explain two things at once: why the response from the local authorities felt so strangely muted, and why Bobby felt confident enough to post the video publicly in the first place. And if both of those things are true, they point to a simple but uncomfortable possibility: that the case didn't go anywhere because the people responsible for investigating it were too close to the people involved. But that is where the facts end and speculation begins. There is no direct evidence proving that local officials deliberately buried this, and nothing about the case directly indicates that Bobby was protected. That said, without the victim ever being clearly identified, it's impossible to prove or disprove any of these theories. Which is also why, despite thousands of people online trying to dig through the footage from every possible angle, there has been no meaningful development to the case over the 2 decades since the footage first surfaced, leaving the entire mystery trapped between two possibilities. Either the unnamed victim survived one of the most brutal assaults ever posted to YouTube, then vanished back into a life where no one could find him, or the video really did capture the final moments of an unidentified man while the people who could have helped him decided to look the other way. On June 16, 2016, a security guard in Utah picked up something on an old AM radio that would go on to be one of the creepiest pieces of audio in recent internet history. The guard's name was Cody Erickson, and at the time he had been working a swing shift at a bank management building somewhere in Utah. Inside the security office was an old AM/FM radio that belonged to his supervisor. And since Cody had already finished his tasks for the night and was just waiting for the next guard to come in, he started turning through the AM stations to pass the time. Most of what came through was exactly what you'd expect from an old radio late at night. But then, somewhere between a sports station on one side and an old music station on the other, Cody heard a woman crying. He tried adjusting the dial multiple times, hoping to pull the signal in more clearly. But each time he moved it, the broadcast either faded into static or got buried underneath one of the nearby stations. Still, what little came through was disturbing enough that he pulled out his phone and started recording. In the audio, the woman sounded like she was pleading with someone to leave her alone, and at one point, she mentioned 2 children. The signal continued wavering in and out throughout the recording, with her voice rising and disappearing beneath the noise. And then, right at the end, the static cleared just long enough for another voice to come through and say something that nobody has ever been able to agree on. To most people who heard it, the words sounded like, "Rip her apart." After this, the broadcast cut out completely. Cody later checked that same stretch of the dial twice a night over the following days, hoping to hear it again, but the voice never returned. So, left with a recording he couldn't explain, he uploaded it to YouTube, hoping someone online might be able to figure out where it had come from. The first, and probably the most comforting theory that the internet came up with, was that the recording was just a scripted performance. The reason is that AM radio isn't as predictable as FM. Depending on where you are and how late you're listening, the dial can pick up all sorts of broadcasts, including old horror dramas and detective shows. So, according to this theory, Cody could have simply tuned into the middle of a fictional scene, and the crying woman was just an actress, while the distorted signal made the performance sound a little too real. Some other users also suggested that it could have been a drive-in movie theater leaking its audio into the radio. For those who don't know, outdoor theaters often transmit film audio over short-range radio so viewers can listen through their car speakers, and that signal can occasionally bleed onto nearby frequencies, which would mean what Cody heard was nothing more than the climax of some horror film leaking out of a transmitter somewhere down the road. But while both of those explanations make sense on the surface, they run into two problems. First, over the years, no one has been able to identify any piece of media, including audiobooks, films, radio shows, and horror dramas that cleanly matches the phrases heard in the broadcast. And second, most modern drive-in theaters tell customers to tune into an FM frequency, not the AM band Cody was listening on. So while a movie or radio drama is probably the easiest explanation to accept, it still doesn't account for why the source has never been identified. But probably the biggest reason people struggle to believe the performance theory was that the crying didn't sound staged. It didn't have the rhythm of an actor waiting for a line, or the clean emotional arc of a scene written to build tension. It sounded broken and uneven, like someone who was struggling to hold themselves together. And this led one Reddit user to suggest a very different theory. According to them, the recording may have come from a call-in radio show, possibly one where distressed callers reached out to a church or counselor for help, and the woman might have been crying while describing something terrible that had happened to her in the past. This would also explain how the final line might have been misheard. Instead of "rip her apart," the voice might have actually said 4 years apart, which would fit much more naturally into a conversation about grief or family trauma. But without the name of the original program, there's no way to verify this theory either, leaving the mystery exactly where it started. Unfortunately, there's a much more chilling possibility of what the audio could have been. Maybe Cody was listening to something that was never meant to be broadcast. Some users pointed out that the audio could have been a leaked signal from a baby monitor nearby. Older baby monitors and wireless security cameras are known to transmit on frequencies that nearby receivers can accidentally pick up. And while that alone doesn't explain every technical detail of Cody's recording, there are real cases where this exact kind of stray signal ended up exposing something deeply disturbing happening inside a private home. For instance, in February 2004, a man in Milwaukee installed a wireless security camera in his home. But while he was flipping between his own cameras, his receiver accidentally picked up a signal from someone else's house. On the screen, he could see two young girls standing with their arms raised above their heads while a woman in the room appeared to be hitting them. When the man contacted law enforcement, police confirmed that his receiver was likely picking up a cross signal from another camera within a radius of about 75 to 150 feet. Similarly, in another case from the Czech Republic in 2007, a father was watching his own baby through a video monitor when the device suddenly picked up a stray signal from another home nearby. It showed a young boy tied up on the bare floor of a room. After the father reported what he saw, police traced the signal to a house in the neighborhood, where the child was found bound with duct tape, severely dehydrated, and being watched over by a video camera. So, with cases like these on record, the idea that Cody's radio caught a stray feed from a monitor or a camera somewhere nearby isn't easy to dismiss. And if that's what happened, then what he was listening to may have been an act of domestic violence, or something much worse, playing out in real time. Unfortunately, without the original broadcast ever being identified, the mystery can't move past speculation. All we really have is a short 2-minute recording of an old radio in a quiet security office. And unless that source is ever found, we may never know whether Cody captured a piece of fiction or something far more real that was never meant to be heard. On May 1st, 1995, a University of Arizona student named Brian Hance was flipping through the campus newspaper, the Arizona Daily Wildcat, when a strange full-page message on page 16 caught his attention. The page was filled with mathematical symbols, scientific notations, and historical references, including an image of Martin Luther surrounded by formulas and cryptic diagrams. At the top, it carried a simple title, May Day 1995. At first, Brian didn't think much of it, assuming it was either an invitation to some college fraternity or some secret club. But this assumption would be proven wrong over the next 2 years, because every year a new version of the same kind of message appeared in the paper. The pages blended mathematics, maps, biblical passages, historical figures, scientific diagrams, and fragments written in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, German, and other languages. Some even included musical notation or hand-drawn illustrations. Others referenced philosophers, theologians, and pivotal moments in history. By 1997, Brian was working as the web administrator for the Arizona Daily Wildcat, which gave him access to the paper's entire archive. So he spent days digging through decades of old issues, and what he found unsettled him on 2 fronts. First, these cryptic pages weren't new. He found similar messages stretching back years, eventually tracing the mystery back to the early 1980s. Second, despite appearing in the newspaper for years, no one at the Daily Wildcat seemed to know who was behind them. The ads were simply delivered through a lawyer, leaving the real author completely anonymous. So, to keep track of everything, Brian created MaydayMystery.org and began archiving every page he could find, hoping that if enough people looked at them together, someone might finally crack what they meant. Digging through the website, you'll find that, although every issue brought a different-looking puzzle, some elements kept repeating. The first and most obvious was the hand-drawn smiley face, which over the years had become something like a signature or logo for the person or people behind the mystery. A small, smirking man with 2 dots for eyes and a sly grin tucked into the corner of page after page. On top of this, Martin Luther also appeared repeatedly, either directly or through references. And so did one particular word, leitmotif. It's a German word that means recurring theme, which is interesting because recurring themes are exactly what these advertisements seem to rely on. At first glance, it's easy to dismiss the archive as the work of a schizophrenic, a theory that has been debated for years on the internet. But after combing through dozens of them, there are 2 reasons why I don't think that theory holds up. For one, the advertisements are incredibly detailed. They pull together mathematics, history, religion, science, multiple languages, maps, and recurring symbols in ways that stay surprisingly consistent over decades. Then there's the money. By 1997 alone, dozens of Mayday advertisements have already been published, and new ones have continued appearing almost every year since the early 1980s, with smaller updates being released in between. A full-page ad in the Wildcat can cost hundreds of dollars each time, which suggests that whoever was behind them had both the financial resources and a long-term commitment to the project. For years, the identity of the people behind these advertisements remained a complete mystery, until Brian finally found the first real lead. It wasn't the anonymous author, but the man who had been submitting the advertisements to the newspaper for years, a Tucson attorney named Robert Truman Hungerford. Brian first learned about Robert after unexpectedly receiving an email from him. Robert confirmed that he acted as the legal representative for the people behind the advertisements. Yet, despite acting as the middleman, he consistently refused to reveal who his clients actually were. And from that point on, Brian's investigation became part of the mystery itself. He began receiving carefully scripted phone calls, cryptic mail, and packages postmarked from Las Vegas and routed through Pakistan, some containing foreign stamps and Middle Eastern coins. After he fell behind on website updates because he was sick, he even received a get well card. None of these messages were openly threatening, but they made one thing clear. Whoever was behind the Mayday mystery knew exactly who Brian was, and they were paying attention to his investigation. And this naturally shifted all the focus towards Robert, because he wasn't a random attorney. He had studied at the University of Arizona, earned a doctorate in theology, became a member of Mensa, the highest IQ society in the world, and reportedly spoke several languages, including Dutch, German, Greek, Hebrew, Latin, Russian, and Spanish. So, when you compare his background to the advertisements with their theological references, historical figures, and multilingual fragments, it becomes easy to understand why people began to suspect he was more than just the lawyer. There's one more detail that makes the connection a lot stronger. If you pull up Robert's old University of Arizona yearbook photo, he appears to have close cropped hair, the eyebrows running almost straight across, and a faint smile, all of which looks exactly like the little smirking man at the bottom of pages. However, he has repeatedly denied being the sole creator. Instead, he claims he was representing an organization known as the Orphanage. In interviews over the years, he described Mayday Mystery as a work of art, while also suggesting there was a real society behind it who dealt with future events. He also insisted that everything needed to understand the mystery is already publicly available on Brian's website, encouraging people to pay particular attention to its theological themes. But if the orphanage is real, no one has been able to prove who they are. Over the years, theories have ranged from a political activist group with roots in the Vietnam War era, to an alternate reality game, to a massive work of conceptual art designed to reward only the most obsessive investigators. Yet, none of these theories explain every piece of the mystery. And it's not because people haven't tried over the decades. One young woman once drove from Phoenix to meet Brian at a cafe in downtown Tucson, carrying a thick binder of research. She believed the Mayday Mystery was connected to the Zodiac Killer, comparing symbols from the ad with ciphers and envelopes linked to the case. Brian heard her out, but told her he didn't think that was it. And before she left, she told him she had already sent everything to the FBI. But not every theory was that far-reaching. One of the most interesting clues came from an anonymous contributor on Brian's website who used the name Near a Terminal. Unlike most people, this person seemed to understand how at least part of the puzzle worked. For one of the earlier ads from the 1980s, the person pointed out that if you counted the brushstrokes in the Chinese characters, you got 24, and if you counted the letters in the English word above them, Richmond, you got 8. Put them together and you get 8/24, or August 24th. And sure enough, the next ad in the series had appeared on August 24th. However, it remains as one of the only times anyone has ever produced a clean, verifiable decode of any part of the mystery. Brian became convinced that Near a Terminal was somehow connected to the orphanage. However, even that breakthrough only cracked one tiny piece of one ad out of hundreds. And that is what makes the Mayday Mystery so unsettling. Every time one part begins to make sense, the larger picture becomes even harder to see. On one occasion, Robert claimed that the mystery went back even further than the newspaper ads. According to him, the first message existed long before 1981, but in a different medium. He refused to say what that medium was, only explaining that the earlier messages were designed so that someone would have to be inside the group to even recognize them. Which means Brian's site may not even contain the complete archive of these puzzles. Nonetheless, for nearly 3 decades, Brian preserved the ads, letters, and any clues connected to the mystery. But even after all this, he never came even close to understanding what the messages actually meant. After more than 40 years, countless investigators, and hundreds of theories, the Mayday Mystery remains unsolved. On September 12, 2008, a 49-year-old Delta Airlines employee named Charles Peck was on his way to Los Angeles for a job interview. The interview was at Van Nuys Airport, and if he got the job, it would finally allow him to move to California and marry his fiancée, Andrea Katz, who had been waiting for him in Westlake Village. But unfortunately, he never managed to reach the station. Instead, he became part of a tragedy whose mystery remains unresolved to this day. At around 4:22 that afternoon, the Metrolink train he was riding collided head-on with a Union Pacific freight train near Chatsworth, California. It was later found that the Metrolink engineer had run the red signal because he was distracted by his phone, texting just seconds before the impact, which led to 25 people losing their lives, and Charles was one of them. While that was tragic on its own, what happened afterwards is the reason Charles Peck's story would continue circulating online years after the disaster. Andrea was driving to pick him up from the Moore Park station when she heard the news of the crash on the radio. She rushed to the scene, and Charles's family soon joined her, hoping he still might be somewhere inside the wreckage. And then, a few hours after the collision, they got their first sign of hope. Charles's son received a call. It was from his father's phone. Over the course of that night, Charles's phone reportedly called his son, his brother, his sister, his stepmother, and Andrea. In total, his family received around 35 calls from his number. But every single time they answered, there was nothing on the other end. Just silence, or a wash of static before the line went dead seconds later. And because rescuers were still searching through the scene, the calls gave the family hope that Charles was still alive, just trapped somewhere in the wreckage. But roughly an hour after the last call, rescuers finally located Charles's body deep inside the first train after tracing him using the signal from his phone. According to the reports given to his family, he had likely died on impact before any of the calls were ever made. However, one detail didn't add up. Rescuers were never able to find his phone anywhere near his body. Now, for a lot of people online, there was only one way to explain that. They claimed Charles was somehow trying to reach his family from the afterlife. But as comforting as that idea may sound, even Charles's fiancée admitted it was something she held on to emotionally, not something she could actually defend. So if we set the afterlife theory aside, we're left with a much harder question. How does a deceased man's phone make 35 calls on its own? The most obvious explanation is a phone malfunction. The incident happened back in 2008 when phones still had physical buttons. So if the device was crushed inside the wreckage, it's possible that pressure, moisture, or damaged circuitry caused it to repeatedly dial numbers from Charles's recent calls or saved contacts. And at first, this theory seems to answer two of the hardest questions at once. It explains how the calls came from Charles's number even though he died on impact, and why nobody could hear anything on the other end. The reason the phone calls eventually stopped could simply be because the phone ran out of battery after switching through the phone book all night long. But the moment you look closely, this theory falls apart on one single detail. A damaged phone firing off signals at random isn't selective about who it calls. It would have hit coworkers, voicemail, or wrong numbers. Instead, every single one of those 35 calls went to a close family member, and not one rang a random contact, which pushes us toward a second, more disturbing theory. Maybe a survivor trapped inside the same wreckage, too injured to speak, found Charles's phone and scrolled through the recent calls, hitting one number after another, hoping someone would trace it back. But this still leaves two major questions unanswered. First, if a conscious person were calling for rescue, why dial the same 5 relatives 35 times and never once call 911? And if someone else was using the phone, why was Charles's body the one found after rescuers traced the signal, and no phone at all? None of these questions disprove the theory, but they do keep it from being a complete answer. There's also a less charitable version of that same idea. Instead of a survivor, maybe someone passing by the wreckage picked up Charles's phone from the debris and started calling his family as a sick, deliberate prank. And out of every theory so far, this is the only one that fully accounts for the missing phone. Somebody took it with them. But it doesn't explain the fact that the rescuers located Charles by tracing the signal from his phone directly to him. If someone really took it with them, the signal should have led rescuers somewhere else entirely, not deep inside the first train where Charles's body was found. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable possibility. What if Charles didn't die right away? For that to be true, the coroner would have had to be wrong about the time of death. And at first, that sounds like a stretch. But it becomes a little less far-fetched when you learn that the officials handling this case had already made at least one documented error involving Charles. In the initial victim list that was released, Charles was listed as 58 years old, nearly 9 years off his actual age. Now, the mistake was shortly corrected, and on its own, it isn't enough to prove that the coroner was wrong about when Charles died. But it does remind us that the public version of events was assembled in the middle of a chaotic, mass casualty disaster where rescuers were trying to save lives, identify bodies, and communicate with grieving families all at the same time. And without Charles's phone ever being recovered, there is no way to know which theory is correct.